Hello, this is Ahmed Isa. We're going to talk about the Russian Ukrainian war. I will start with the introduction. We will speak about the country overview about Ukraine, Russia, and then the relation between them, and then we'll go for the investment climate analysis, followed by the risk assessment and critical analysis at the end. Country overview. We'll start with Ukraine. Ukraine is in the east of Europe, and it's one of the largest country in Europe. Ukraine has a fertile landscape and abundance of natural resources. Its strategic location make Ukraine as a link between Europe and Asia, and that helped Ukraine in the trade of energy. Politically, Ukraine has experienced instability since the beginning of this century, but when the 1922, when they have been absorbed by the Soviet Union. The economy is traditionally relied on agriculture, metals, and heavy industry. The agriculture is like almost 10% of the GDP, and the IT sector, which is still fluctuating between 3 to 4% from 2019 to 2024. However, gaining the independence in 1991, uh, the economy in Ukraine has been affected by the corruption inherited from the Soviet Union communism. By 2014 and the start of the conflict with Russia and the ousting of Yankovich has pushed Russia to annex the Crimea island, and that was a move from Russia to have a place in the Black Sea, targeting the Sevastopol airport. And then by 2022, the full scale invasion has destroyed the economy of Ukraine and has caused a GDP contraction. Inflation has spiked, and the national currency hryvnia faces ongoing pressure despite central bank interventions and rise. Infrastructure damage, energy shortage, and export has been disrupted. Um, Despite these challenges, Ukraine has shown resilience, receiving international aid and uh, advancing the EU integration. But the government is prioritizing reforms and anti-corruption measures. Major challenges, including risks, continued conflict is still ongoing so far, and then the high cost of rebuilding. Uh, Now we are going to talk about Russia. Russia is the largest country in the world, spanning between Europe and Asia and Europe, mainly in Asia. Its vast territory grants its geopolitical influence and dominance in global energy, and that boast Russian export to up to 28% of GDP. Historically, Russia had a strong centralized state focusing on defense and security. Energy revenues are a key source of governmental income and foreign currency. Russia also has a economy the economic strengths in defense, the cell weapon, and their most famous gun is the AK-47. Um, uh, it has also fertile landscapes, and it's also uh, still not really diversified economy like the large economies that we know in the world. Since 2014, a Western sanction has affected the Russian economy, and that has become more with the 2022 full-scale invasion, and that isolated Russia and pushed Russia to go towards the China and India. Economic effects also include capital flight, currency volatility, and rising inflation. The domestic market remains sizable, but the real incomes has fallen. The government responses include substitution policies, increased state control over the economy, and pivoting towards, as I said, India and China. While some sectors shows resilience, long-term growth is really challenging because of limited foreign investment and technological decoupling from the West and ongoing brain drain. High level of corruption, as we know, this is what they inherit from the communism of the Soviet Union, and dominant state presence continue to hinder the private sector development. Russia economy future hinges on how it handles sanction and world-related uh, causes. Now we're going to talk about the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. Uh, it's like one nation started in Kiev when that great Vladimir has converted to Christianity and accepted Orthodox Christianity to be the like official religion of Kiev as the state of Slavic or Kievan Rus, as they say. And then moving on to the 17th century, and that war between Polish, Lithuanian, and the Russian has divided Ukraine into West Bank and East Bank. West is mostly pro-European, and the East is also mostly uh, pro-Russian. And then 1793, uh, the right bank, which is the Western Ukraine, has been annexed by Russian Empire. And then moving to 1917, when the communism revolution started, Ukraine has been absorbed by the communism of the Soviet Union by 1922, and then in 1930, one of the most famous one of the most famous famine, Holodomor famine, in 1932 to 1933, has killed almost 7 million Ukrainian, and Stalin at that time replaced them with other Soviet Union citizen to diminish the Ukrainian language. And then again in 2014, that Yankovich ousting in Kiev has started the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and then Russia started to invade Crimea, and that was a Russia move to have a place in the Black Sea, Sevastopol port. Um, in 2022, and we know about the full scale invasion has destroyed the Ukrainian economy and also affected the Russian economy, but mostly the Ukrainian economy has been affected, and the GDP has been has a big contraction. The relation now is just like a conflict after it has been like 25 to 30% of the Ukrainian Ukrainian trade is linked to Russia. So since 2022, the invasion, trade flows collapsed. Ukrainian export to Russia nearly 50% down and losing billions. Russia seizure and the illicit export of Ukrainian grain from the occupied region in the east area uh, has undermined the Ukrainian agricultural earning. Disrupted pipelines complicate the Europe energy flows, and Ukraine loses fees and from gas transit. As we know that Russia was exporting gas through pipeline in Ukraine to Europe and mainly to Germany. Sweeping sanction against Russia have affected its energy export and financial system, and the conflict has accelerated military spending in both countries and globally to because the NATO and the EU, European Union, has also the government has expand their spending in the defense because, uh, as a cautious move towards the Russian invasion to Ukraine. Now I will hand over to Mariam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to delve into a critical topic that has fundamentally reshaped the global economic landscape, the investment climate analysis in the wake of the Russian Ukrainian war. This conflict, while geographically concentrated, has had far-reaching implications, creating both significant challenges and unexpected opportunities across various sectors and regions worldwide. Our aim today is to provide a comprehensive overview of these impacts, focusing on key economic, political, and market factors that influence investment decisions globally. Let's begin by examining the overall economic environment. The war has undeniably triggered economic slowdowns, particularly in Europe and developing economies. GDP trends and sectoral strength. We've been surging energy costs, disrupted trade routes, and heightened uncertainty. Europe, heavily reliant on Russian gas, experienced a staggering 144% surge in gas prices and 78% increase in electricity prices. This has significantly depressed the GDP growth, especially in energy-intensive sectors like manufacturing, as we can see in the slide. Inflation and interest rates has surged globally, largely driven by rising fuel and food prices. Food prices alone has jumped from 14.3% a year in 2022, which was the highest since 1990. In response, central banks, including the ECB and the Federal Reserve, have aggressively hiked interest rates to rein in inflation, impacting, unfortunately, the credit availability and investment. While going to the fiscal policy stance, we do believe that the governments are deploying targeted fiscal measures, such as subsidies and price caps, to cushion the inflation below from vulnerable groups. However, these measures are putting significant pressure on public finances, particularly in emerging markets with limited fiscal space. Tackling the labor market conditions as the fourth point, while tight labor market persists in developed economies, inflation-induced real wage erosion and high borrowing costs have weakened consumption. Interestingly, Eastern European labor markets are benefiting from nearshoring trends due to competitive wages and skilled workforce availability. Let's move to the third slide. Political and regulatory environment. The war has significantly escalated geopolitical risks, leading to global instability, such as political stability and transparency, foreign ownership and restrictions, ease of doing business and legal protections, corruption perceptions. Going to the political instability and transparency point, NATO and EU countries have increased defense spending, and political tension with Russia has resulted in numerous sanctions and counter-sanctions, creating a complex and uncertain political landscape. For the foreign ownership and restrictions, several countries have imposed foreign investment restrictions in strategic sectors like energy, tech, defense, to protect national interest. Russia, in turn, has imposed capital controls and restrictions on foreign divestments, making it challenging for foreign investors to exist. For the ease of doing business and legal practices, in order to protect that, the rule of law and legal protections are being reshaped by global supply chain diversifications. Nearshoring trends are favoring countries with strong regulatory environments such as Poland, Vietnam, as businesses seek more reliable and predictable operating environments. Corruption perception. The perception of corruption in Russia has increased significantly, making it an unattractive destination for investors. Emerging markets with better governance like the Czech Republic and Malaysia are benefiting from diverted investments as investors seek more transparent and stable environment. The war has always profoundly impacted global trade and investment policies. For in the trade agreements, EU countries are deepening intra-bloc trade to reduce their dependency on Russia. North America is leveraging the UCMCA agreement to strengthen regional production, particularly in semiconductors and autos, aiming for great self-sufficiency. Bilateral and tax treaties. Trade shifts have impacted bilateral treaties. Western nations have revoked favorable trade status with Russia. Conversely, countries like India, Vietnam are forming new trade pacts to absorb diverted foreign direct investment, capitalizing on the shifting global supply chains. For the incentive for investors to attract nearshoring, several countries are offering significant incentives. Examples include tax, holidays, subsidies, and special economic zone in strategic sectors like renewable energy and manufacturing, seen in places like Hungary, Poland, and Mexico. For the effect on infrastructure and logistics, it have been in critical areas, as it affected by the conflict, highlighting vulnerabilities and driving new investments. When it comes to transport, energy, and digital infrastructure, countries are increasingly investing in digital infrastructures and energy independence, particularly in renewable and LNG terminals, to secure their energy supplies and reduce reliance on volatile sources. The EU, for instance, is tripling its gas reserves, securing alternate suppliers, and aiming to reduce consumptions by 15%. When it comes to the effect of the war on the logistics performance and port access, global port congestion and logistics delay have been significantly worsened by the war. As a result, nations with advanced logistics infrastructure, such as the Netherlands, UAE, and Singapore, are emerging as resilient hubs, offering more reliable trade routes and supply chain solutions. Let's now go to the market access and to consumer base. So we will consider the market access and consumer base, which are very crucial for investment decisions. Domestic market size and income. The levels it developed in markets remaining attractive due to their high purchasing power. Even though inflation has eroded real incomes, the emerging markets with large youth populations like India and Indonesia are benefiting from global investment redirection as businesses seek new growth opportunities. Access to regional markets, such as countries within established trade blocs, such as Asian, the EU, and US MCA, offer better markets access and are key beneficiaries of supply chains realignment, providing integrated markets and reduced trade barriers. Culture and linguistic factors, we will delve into these points. Investor familiarity and shared standards within religion, like EU simplifies expansions, nearshoring trends also favor culturally and linguistically are aligned. Markets such as Mexico from the US and Eastern Europe for Germany, facilitating smoother business operations and integrations. Finally, let's look at the financial and currency conditions, which have experienced significant volatility, such as exchange rate stability, access to local and finance and capital markets, profit repartition restrictions. For the exchange rate stability, the war triggered global currency volatility. The euro and yen weakened considerably, while the US dollar strengthened, reflecting its safe haven status. Emerging market currencies were pressured, especially where energy's imports spiked, leading to increased import costs and inflationary pressures. Access to local finance and capital. Tightening global liquidity has made financing more expensive across the board. However, stable markets such as the UAE, Singapore, and other diversified economies with solid credit ratings offer better access to finance, becoming more attractive for investors seeking stability. When it comes to the profit repartition restrictions, Russia imposed strict controls on capital outflows and foreign investor exits, creating significant challenges for businesses trying to repatriate profits or divest. In contrast, investment-friendly nations are ensuring regulatory clarity for profit repartition to attract and retain global investors, providing a more predictable environment. In conclusion, the Russia-Ukraine war has fundamentally reshaped the global investment landscape. While Russia and Ukraine have become high-risk investment zones with significant capital flight, several key beneficiaries have emerged from the reordering. When it comes to Eastern Europe, countries like Poland, Czech Republic, and Romania are emerging as nearshoring hubs for European manufacturing, benefiting from their strong EU market access and proximity. When it comes to Southeast Asia, Vietnam and Indonesia are attracting diversified manufacturing investment and offering alternative supply chain solutions, becoming increasingly important players in global production. When it comes to North America, the USA, Mexico, and Canada are benefiting from shoring initiatives, trade stability, and relative insulation from European energy challenges, strengthening their regional supply chains. When it comes to energy independent economies, nations with domestic energy production or a strong focus on renewable energy are gaining a distinct advantage due to enhanced energy security, price stability, and a focus on sustainability. Overall, global investors have rapidly shifted their priorities to emphasize political stability, diversified supply chains, energy security, and aligned geopolitical values. This fundamental reordering of risk assessment has significantly altered global investment flows, creating a new opportunity in previously overlooked markets while elevating risks in traditionally stable regions. Thank you, and now we'll move on to my classmate.
Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. My name is Reem Al-Mammar and I will be presenting data-driven risk assessment for foreign investors operating in Russia and Ukraine between 2015 and 2025, taking a political and risk war exploration on corruption, and introducing the core political risks impacting foreign direct investment in both Russia and Ukraine, especially during the 2022 to 2025 period, where the war began. The risk for both countries are 10 out of a 10, indicating a maximum risk levels. These are active conflict zones with extensive infrastructure damage, civilians casualties, and long-term instabilities. For investors, this is not only threatens physical assets, but also paralyze long-term planning and operational continuity. Next is explorating risk. Russia scores 9 out of 10, primarily due to forced nationalization or takeovers of foreign-owned assets such as Shell and McDonald's. These were either seized or sold under Durus aimed sanctions. Ukraine scored 7 out of 10, mainly driven by wartime destruction rather than state-led nationalizations. Finally, the corruption index underscores weak institutional quality. Ukraine scores 33 out of 100 and Russia 28 out of 100, according to Transparency International. These low scores reflect poor governance, equipped legal enforcement, and elevated risk of bribery, favorism, and legal unpredictability. Taking together these indicators make it clear that political risk is deeply embedded in and systematic rather than temporary and or isolated. Investors need robust mitigation strategies such as political risk insurance, institutions like MIGA, or joint ventures with local firms to navigate political networks and sanctions compliance audits, particularly when operating near within Russian markets. Moving to the next slide. Economic volatility and GDP inflation and debt, highlighting the macroeconomic instability stemming from ongoing conflict. Starting with the GDP, Ukraine experienced a catastrophic contraction of 29% in 2022, reflecting the collapse of production, investment, and consumption amid war. Comparatively, Russia economy shrank only 2.1%, demonstrating short-term resilience through a Turkey and energy export. Next, inflation has surged both countries. Ukraine recorded 26%, largely driven by supply disruption and currency depreciation. On the other hand, Russia saw 13% of inflation, reflecting internal price controls, but also raising import costs due to sanctions. Lastly, debt to GDP figures show diverging fiscal space or gap. Ukraine debt rose to 88%, driven by emergency spending, reduced revenues, and international borrowing. On the other hand, Russia maintained a low ratio of 17%, though this is maybe misleading given off-budget military expenses. These indicators together reflect the fragile economic foundation for FDI in Ukraine and artificial stability in Russia, requiring continuous short-term investment strategy. And now moving on to exchange rate risk, depreciation, and controls. We are examining the risk, which is very crucial for investors repatriating profits and taking back their money to home, showing that Ukraine rare index the real effective exchange rate fell from 105 in 2015 to 85 by 2025. This steady depression signals the deteriorating purchasing power and makes dollar-dominated liabilities more expensive for firms operating locally. Meanwhile, Russia deployed from 100 to 92, yet this figure makes underlying vitality due to capital controls and state interventions. The artificial support provided by Russian central banks hides long-term instabilities and deters confidence. For foreign investors, this implies two critical things: profit erosion in local currency terms and the need of hedge exposure using currency swaps or to retain earnings in stable currencies like US dollar or euros outside of the region. Now moving on to regulatory risk, focusing on uncertainty post-2022. Russia legal system has become opaque and retaliatory. Western firms have faced forced sales licensing and restrictions and unexpected asset seizures. Its FDI restriction scores is high. Score is high at 21% or at 21. Ukraine, by contrast, is moving toward EU-aligned reforms with an FDI restrictiveness score of just 0.9%. However, enforcement capacity remains limited during wartime. To mitigate regulatory shocks, firms must use the stabilization clauses in contracts and employ escrow mechanism, and also consult legal experts with cross-border dispute resolutions. Moving on to security risks, remaining one of the most pressuring FDI challenge. The Global Peace Index in 2022 ranks Ukraine at 153 and Russia at 160 out of 163 countries, signaling extreme conflict risk. In addition, the U.S. State Department classifies both as level 4 do not travel zones. This triggers insurance surges, evacuation plans, and reduced human mobility. Investors should avoid fixed asset investment and move toward digital or mobile business models. Moving to linking the risks to economic impact. First and foremost, inflation is very important because cost and erodes consumer spending, especially in energy and food prices surging from disrupted exports. For Ukraine, it's wheat, and for Russia, it's oil and gas. Currency volatility. Both currency devaluation, capital outflows from emerging markets, and also there is supply chain disruption where the Black Sea is blocked and its route blocked, impacting metal, grain, and fertilizer markets, hitting logistics and input sourcing. Moving to trade risk, sanctions on Russia cut off technology oil market, and Ukraine exports are paralyzed. FDI and capital flight, massive investors withdraw from Russia and Ukraine. Interest rates policy, central banks hiked rates to fight war-induced inflation, while public spending surging in defense budgets and refugee relief programs. Lastly, geopolitical spillovers, NATO military posture, MENA food insecurity, and global realignment. So the war not just impacted the two countries, but the globe as a whole. Here we can see the final table summarizing all the macroeconomic risk and their relative impact on the economy after 2022. And we see that public spending pressures inflation and geopolitical spillovers are showing here how it's linked. Thank you for listening for the risks, and we recommend investors to analyze the market before entering the Russian Ukrainian areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. So, moving on to the critical analysis part of the report. Firstly, we will be discussing about the economic impact caused by Russia-Ukraine war. The economic impact stems from global supply side shocks, supply chain disruptions, particularly in energy and agriculture sector. In the chart, we can see the crude oil price that increased drastically during the war period. It benefited Russia because Russia is a major exporter of oil. It will have a short-term positive impact for Russia in its GDP. It almost crossed the all-time high of $120. The natural gas prices also increased. The corn wheat prices increased steeply. It's a benefit for both Russia and Ukraine because 30 percentage of wheat exporters are Russia and Ukraine, the both countries. Now the metal index also increased, Russia being a major exporter of metals like aluminum, steel, etc. Globally, the war introduced stagflation risk. This environment created a stagflation risk, which means that low growth and high inflation, low supply, which increased the prices. It is mainly due to supply chain disruptions. Now, moving on to the geopolitical impact, we can see a sharp upward trend since 2017, which indicates increasingly protectionist global environment. We can see after post 2020, there's a steep acceleration. The goods are facing restrictions, investments followed by investments, services, etc. And also, we could say that the Russia-Ukraine war added another layer. Many countries imposed sanctions, tariffs, and bans, particularly on energy and defense goods. Now, into the geopolitical risk. After the 9/11, we can see the highest geopolitical risk spike is during the Russia-Ukraine war, particularly driven by direct war escalation and global military responses like NATO troop movements, etc. This heightened the risk of uncertainty in policy making. In the overall economy, we could say that it was an uncertainty because the prices are increasing drastically. The policies need to be restructured as well. Now, moving on to the infrastructure impact, this war has devastated fiscal capital in Ukraine. It's like the World Bank estimated around dollar 400 billion for reconstruction needs. In the map, we could see the Russian drone and missile strikes targeting energy infrastructure in Ukraine. So this creates a long-term productivity drag and reduces the private investment. The economy will be way behind other countries as well. It also affects the human capital, like the workers are displaced, they became unemployed, unemployment rises. So it creates a short-term effect in the economy. Thus, if we drew a short-run aggregate supply curve, we could see it will be a leftward shift in the supply curve. Now, these factors reduces GDP, inflation rises, unemployment rises, etc. And there are several aids provided by organizations such as IMF, World Bank, EU, etc. to try to recover from those damages they caused during the war. Now, we did a regression analysis for Russia and Ukraine. We did the GDP regression analysis. So, in order to identify certain significant independent variables, we concluded it with trade, food price index, exchange rate, crude oil price, etc. And we added a dummy variable, a war impact variable, to see if there's any significance that is caused due to this war. So the highest coefficient is for 4% for crude oil price. It means that 1% increase in crude oil will increase 4% of GDP for Russia. It makes sense, right? Because there's the prices of crude oil increase drastically, which grows the all-time high. So the increase in GDP is valid. The next one is the food price index, around 3.75%, which makes sense. The negative one is the exchange rate. The dollar and the Russian currency created an economic uncertainty, which shows the negative relationship. Then the war impact, the dummy variable war impact, it shows a positive sign of 2%. The overall war, it created a positive impact for Russia's GDP. Like it increased, we could say that it increased, like the metal index increased, the crude oil price increased, food price index increased. These created a positive for war as well. Now, moving on to the Ukraine regression of GDP, we can say that there's a negative trend in trade. It is mainly due to the supply chain disruptions, the closure of ports, Black Sea Grain Corridor, etc., which caused a negative coefficient. The food price index, almost positive 1%. Then the war impact is negative 0.24. Had a slight War had a slight impact for the GDP of Russia. Sorry, Ukraine. The R score is 0.87. Overall, this is the regression analysis we did for Russia and Ukraine. Now, I will be handing over the next topic to my friend Rohit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Basit. Now let's look at the impact of the war on the commodities. Right? As we see here on the graph, we can find that just when the war started in 2022, we find that the crude oil prices have just skyrocketed from 65 to $130 per barrel. Now, the spike wasn't just due to actual supply disruption, but it was actually caused because of a lot of panic in the global market, right? It was driven because of this anticipatory panic in the global market, and it impacted a lot of the Western countries because they imposed a lot of sanctions to Russia, and Russia being one of the key energy providers, uh, it had a global impact because of this, right? Even in the prices of the natural gas, we find that it increased over 400%, and it mainly hit Europe because Europe, being one of their biggest buyers from Russia, had a lot of impact on this, right? Just to take another example, we had companies like Volkswagen and BASF who used to predominantly rely on Russia, and they had to move and relocate their production just because of the input costs that was very high, right? On the food front, however, Ukraine had halted their grain export because in the global essence, Ukraine holds a very dominant position of almost providing 10% of the wheat production of the world, right? Which has a huge impact on the food price index. Coming to the supply side, obviously there are a lot of shocks. You find that the commodities are inelastic in demand, and any disruptions that led to outsize the price effect, right? that's what happened across the oil and gas and the food markets. Now, now this slide talks about the inflation comparison of the pre-war, post-invasion war for Russia on Ukraine, right? In the US, the inflation jumped from 2.1% to 8.6 by mid 2022. Right, so Europe saw an even more severe spike, and Germany and the UK crossed almost 10% of inflation at their peak. Now, this is largely uh, driven because of the energy market, right? And we can see how this war has also impacted India. Yeah, for that matter, we find that the uh, inflation rose to around 7.8%, which reflects a very high impact because the fuel and edible oil costs, which had been heavily reliant on the imports from both Russia and Ukraine, right? Now, what do we find from this is that what was the response globally? There was a huge monetary tightening on the by the Federal Reserve. Right, they raised the interest around 11 times between March 2022 and in the mid 2023. Right, even the European Central Bank, they had ended a decade worth of negative rates, and they also pushed for the borrowing costs to be 4.5%, right? But while inflation is moderating now, you can say the damage was already done, and the central banks were literally walking on a tight uh, inflation and had even curbed or even stopped growth for that matter. Now, a rare, or you could say the combination of all this impacted for a slow growth and high inflation. And this was last seen globally only in the 1970s. So the war has literally pushed us dangerously close to that territory as well. Right? Now, let's examine the GDP impact of Ukraine and Russia. Right now, Ukraine's economy has collapsed by around 29% in 2022. This was also due to the destruction that was caused on the infrastructure, which I believe even Basit would have pointed out. Right, the power grids, the ports, roads, and factories were all bombed, and the economy lost not just infrastructure but also labor, and millions of Ukrainians were displaced. Some of them even finding refuge in other countries and probably starting a life there. Right, the Russia's GDP surprisingly had also reduced to around 2.1% in 2022, and that is also predominantly because of the sanctions. But they were able to sort of recuperate because of their trade with China and India, right? So that makes them a little more resilient because of their energy that they're providing it, as they had. That was the biggest resource that people needed. But on the other hand, over 1,000 companies within Russia had moved out because of the sanctions that were put down on them. Now, in this slide, what we get to see is we get to see how inflation and the supply shock played out differently across different sectors in the region. Right now, if you see Europe's energy sector was hit the hardest. Like I said, it's heavily reliant on Russia, being its biggest provider of natural gas and even oil as such. Right, even the other European countries like Germany, Italy, Hungary, uh, and Russia had means and Hungary had to basically scamp and go switch to either US or Qatar to provide them with the oil and the natural gases. Right, the African agriculture sector was also heavily exposed because the wheat imports from Russia and Ukraine. Right. In terms of the technology sector, we see that globally they were impacted by the disruption in the neon gas, which is used for semiconductors, and palladium, which is why the prices of the cars manufactured, even the other automotive and metal industries, the prices skyrocketed, right? Predominantly, even the aluminum prices uh, had created a huge crisis in the manufacturing sector. Now, all of this basically shows how the war has created a sort of a ripple effect in terms of, and it also shows us how interconnected all the supply chains through the world is. Right? To conclude on our presentation, we just like to say that um, the power of the war, right, has created such a huge impact. It has not just impacted the two countries, but it has also created a sort of an economical crisis all across the world. And it just shows how fragile and interconnected all our supply chain and logistical systems are, and how interconnected the economy of the world is in today's time. And if you say back in the 90s, it wasn't the case because a lot of people were segregated. But now we just find how interconnected every country is, and how important it is to stop war within these two nations, not just for a peace treaty, but also in terms of a global, larger economical requirement. Thank you.